Well, I see by the clock on the wall that it shows 12 o'clock. So this is August 28, 2020. This is the St. Croix County Government Center, County Boardroom, room 1284. This is the time and place that has been noticed for the second day of meeting of this month's Zoning Board of Adjustment. My name is Buck Malick. I'm the Chair of the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and I therefore call the meeting to order. It is appropriate at a time like this to make sure that the meeting was properly published under the pertinent laws of the state of Wisconsin. If anybody has a reason to think that this meeting was not appropriately published, please speak at this time and we'll attempt to deal with it. In my dozen or so years of being chairman, I've never known a challenge to that, but we always ask. We will now do a roll call. Oh, and let the record show that no one stated an objection to the publication. I'll lead the roll call. I am a resident of the town of Hudson, representing the town of Hudson on the St. Croix County Board of Adjustment. Mr. Peterson?
Dave Peterson, District 15, Board Supervisor, Town of Kinnickinnick.
Joe Miller, Citizen Member, Town of Hammond.
Dave Nickum, Citizen Member, Town of Baldwin.
Good. Let me ask the zoning administrator staff to identify themselves, and let's test to see if their microphones work.
Mike Wozniak, Land Use Administrator and Zoning Administrator.
Sarah Burrell, Land Use Specialist.
Very good. Thank you. Let's proceed with the first hearing then. Mr. Wozniak, the floor is yours.
Yes. We have on the agenda for your consideration three items that related to a request from Tom Lee at 288 Cove Road in the town of Troy and within the Lower St. Croix Riverway overlay. And I'll note that this involves a conditional use request and two related variance requests. From the staff standpoint, we've structured the staff report with an overview of all three items, but the findings and actions are set up so that you would take separate actions on the conditional use and the two variances. But I'll provide some highlights on the three requests to give you an overview here. The applicant purchased the property in 2019 and has been renovating the property. There are non-conforming structures on the property, and the applicant would like to make improvements to these structures that are beyond the ordinary maintenance and repair. The driveway cuts through the slope preservation zone, and there is a structural erosion control measure that's retaining the driveway. This retaining wall, it's rotten and it needs to be replaced. I've been to the property, viewed it, and determined that the replacement is necessary to avoid erosion. So I think that's a pretty straightforward part of this request. The residence is located within the ordinary high water mark setback and within the slope preservation zone of the Lower St. Croix Riverway overlay district. Upon staff inspection of the property back in June 26th, it was determined that the upper attached deck appeared to have been expanded without approval, and the lower attached deck was completely removed. Therefore, the property owner was informed to cease renovations and to apply for two variances to reconstruct the decks per Chapter 17.36 I3, and non-conforming accessory structures may not be reconstructed or expanded. So that's the nature of the two variance requests. Now, just a little bit more background here. The home predates the establishment of the Riverway Overlay District Ordinance and is located within the 200-foot ordinary high water mark setback and within the slope preservation zone. As noted, the driveway cuts through the slope preservation zone and in order to provide access to the home from Cove Road. I'll also note the regional flood elevation is 692 feet. The structure is non-conforming to the St. Croix County floodplain ordinance as well. Let me just jump to the presentation here, pardon me. Kind of skip through. And to orient you on the property, the deck and the patio are on the sort of the northeast side of the structure, with the driveway coming down from Cove Road to basically provide access to the house down a fairly substantial slope. Just jump ahead. The retaining wall will not be expanded, and it will be replaced with rock boulders. And there are essentially three segments to the work. A smaller segment on what would be the sort of the southwest side, and two segments with a break on the northeast side of the driveway. The intent is to use natural materials, basically rock boulders, and to place those from the driveway so that there isn't more disturbance alongside the driveway on either side. No trees will be removed for this part of the project, since the existing retaining wall can be readily seen from the river. The new retaining wall should be visually inconspicuous also. Now, just to move on here a little bit, regarding stormwater and erosion control, construction plans and erosion sediment control plans have been reviewed. Required additional erosion control measures will be installed per staff recommendation. The applicant has, and their contractor has provided some details on what they intend to do. There will also be additional information required before the work proceeds. The existing grade of the wall will not change, nor will there be excavation into the driveway. And drain tile will not be used behind the boulder wall. Now, currently, downspouts direct roof runoff toward the river. One thing that's, I think, beneficial here is the applicant is willing to redirect this runoff towards a new infiltration area to decrease direct runoff towards the river. And just so you understand what you're seeing with this plan, basically this access path area is basically an area that will be used and restored to provide for equipment, basically accessing sort of the river side of the front side of the property, or back side, depending on how you're looking at it. Just a couple photos real quick. The retaining wall along the driveway. And this is actually a little corner, I believe, near the side of the house that is in need of repair and will be addressed as well. To continue the overview, the second part of the request involves the lower deck, replacement of the lower deck. Essentially, the applicant is wanting to replace the deck with a patio. This was not discussed initially, and the contractor found that basically the deck was rotten and needed to be replaced, and so proceeded to essentially tear out the existing lower decking. The property owner is requesting to replace this decking with a paver patio, as I noted. The area identified in red, basically this is consistent with what was there for the lower deck area. We've noted that it was going to reduce by about 15 square feet, but in our most recent visit on the property with the contractor, I think we concluded it was essentially going to be the same square footage as the previous lower deck. And you can also see there's essentially a boulder wall to essentially secure, hold up the soil for the patio construction.
Excuse me, but this is a good point to ask the question. Retaining walls are allowed only if they solve an erosion problem. If I remember right, and I may not remember right, you'll correct me if I've got it wrong. Is there an erosion problem?
I don't believe the intent of this, and the applicant can speak to this as well, is to address an erosion problem. I think the intent is, in going from a deck that essentially had a continuous board to essentially support the decking materials, these boulders are essentially supporting the fill, the base that's going to underlay the patio. It's not a high wall. It's not really structurally retaining slope. But you can certainly pose that question to the applicant. They may be able to explain a little more clearly why they're proposing to use the boulders there. I would go on with the upper deck. The intent, again, originally was to work within the ordinary maintenance and repair provision, which did not involve expansion, structural alteration, or reconstruction. Now, the renovations were, as they were underway, the stairway was deemed rotten and was removed, and the contractor squared off the deck with a 4-by-4 foot area, essentially with this graphic in this slide. It would be right in this area, so essentially part of where the stairs came up to the deck, and the proposed deck will no longer have stairs to the lower deck. Pre and post dimensions of the upper deck are shown, and the overall footprint of the deck is depending on how you look at it, is actually smaller because you don't have the stairs extending down, although the lower patio would be underneath that area where the stairs come down. So essentially it's same size, but there is a difference, I'd note, in the visual impact, because from the water, if you're looking at the property, those stairs come down and you're kind of looking directly at where the stairs would be coming down, you know, albeit from a distance. With the stairs removed, your view is actually through the deck to the landscape behind, so it's probably less conspicuous with the stairs not being part of the proposed improvements. Just a couple visuals on this. This was the decking that was there below, and upper decking as well. The stairs are gone at this point, but you can see where that notch was. and couple views. And I think where these concrete blocks are essentially are what we're talking about for the boulders. So you can see along this area here. These are a couple shots of the work that's been done to date on the reconstruction of the upper deck. The railing isn't fully in, but it would essentially be like what was there with the deck before the reconstruction. The difference being the 4-by-foot additional area is at this corner. There's another footing below, and the stairs that carry down here are no longer going to be part of the new plan. And the patio, of course, would be underneath and provide for access from the lower floor. This is a shot from the river, and looking at the house, there's a massive cottonwood tree here, but the upper deck would be right in this area here, and it's visible, but not, I'd say, especially conspicuous. Probably a little less so with the stairs removed. The lower deck, and if the patio is allowed to move forward, is really not conspicuous from the view from the river. I would note that there are 2 ash trees that the applicant proposes to remove. One is along the northeast side of the house, and it's kind of hanging over the house and considered a hazard. The other would be on the river side of the house, kind of behind the big cottonwood tree that blocks the view from here, and it is dead and does definitely need to be removed because it is definitely a hazard. We have not received comments from the Wisconsin DNR or the town of Troy. Now, this is structured, again, with 3 actions. I'm not going to, some of the material is redundant, so I'm not going to go through in detail all of the findings and recommendations for each of the recommended actions. I would note that, as usual, you have the options to approve, deny, or table and postpone based on a need for more information or unresolved questions. Just a couple highlights on the findings for request number 1. And I would emphasize with the conditional use permit that what's proposed in the conditional use permit can't be fully implemented in terms of the work on the deck and the patio unless the 2 variances are approved. So bear that in mind. I think there is a condition under the conditions that relates to that. I'd note number 4 in the findings here. Again, there's an existing retaining wall comprised of timbers that are rotten and in need of repair. The owner is requesting to reconstruct the wall with rock boulders. The retaining wall will not be expanded, the existing grade will not be changed, and nor will this involve excavation in the driveway. And the drain tile will not be used behind the boulder wall, and the wall will be visually inconspicuous from the river based on where that work is going to occur. And I would just flag finding 8 here and note that conditional uses shall be granted subject to the following provisions. And I think important here, the proposed residential use is designed to conform to the standards in section 17.36 and therefore not violate the spirit or intent of the St. Croix lower the St. Croix County Lower St. Croix Riverway Overlay District. The proposed use is designed to conform, again, to standards in the ordinance and would not be contrary to public health, safety, or general welfare. And also that it would not adversely affect property values in the neighborhood, The scope of this work really falls within what the property had previously, with the really with the exception of that removal of the stairs and slight adjustment to that upper deck related to the removal of the stairs. I just call out that also that the intent is to remove 2 trees, and there's not a stormwater management plan for the property, though a complete stormwater management erosion sediment control plan will be submitted and must be approved by the department staff prior to any site disturbance. The conditions on this, just key here, the CUP would allow the applicant to reconstruct structural erosion control measure located within the slope preservation zone and in accordance with plans submitted on July 6, 2020, as provided with the conditions below. And I would not go through all of these, but just call out that the property owner is needing to execute and record an affidavit describing the approved structural erosion control measure and related maintenance requirements with the Register of Deeds within 30 days. And also that they're required to get any other necessary permits and approvals from the town of Troy or any other local, state, federal permits that may be required in compliance with floodplain regulations. So that, and just to call out condition number 6 regarding the CUP, we note that any new owner of this property must adhere with standards and condition of approved variance. Well, this again assumes that the variances are approved and the construction conforms with them. I'm not going to highlight the go through the variance statutes and criteria. You're familiar with those, but if there are any questions, I would suggest regarding the variances, it's always important to key in on the specific criteria noted halfway down the page here, 1 through 3. There must be unique property limitation, and the applicant must prove an unnecessary hardship exists when compliance would unreasonably prevent the owner from using the property for permitted purpose or would render conformity with such restrictions unnecessarily burdensome. Lastly, a variance may not be granted which results in harm to the public interest. The findings, again, there's redundancy here, so I'm not going to go through with what was flagged in the conditional use permit, but I would say that regarding the lower deck, note that the applicants filed for the application for the variance to reconstruct a non-conforming accessory structure, the lower attached deck, and essentially convert it to a patio. The key here regarding the variance is regarding unnecessary hardship. The home predates the Riverway District, so the hardship is not self-created. Literal enforcement of the ordinance would eliminate the use of the deck for ingress and egress from previously existing doorway. And regarding unique property limitations, the existing single-family residence and deck in its entirety is within the ordinary high water mark. And Regarding whether there's no harm to public interest, the request will meet the Riverway Overlay District. Limited vegetation will be removed during construction, only to limit safety hazards. And the lower deck is currently inconspicuous from the river. The surrounding property values will not be negatively affected. Also, staff have worked with the applicant, and they've committed to planting a couple river birch trees that would help filter views as they grow of the upper deck, which is really the only conspicuous part of this proposal. And regarding the variance for the lower deck, we do have a recommendation for approval. I would just note on this that specifically that it again is to reconstruct a lower deck in accordance with plans submitted in July 2020. And specifically that I'd call out that the applicant shall have 1 year from the issuance of these approvals to commence reconstruction of the deck and 2 years to complete the project. Well, as you've seen, there's already been some work done, less on the lower deck, of course, than the upper deck. And I'm just going to move on again to the final variance request with this overview, and that is for the upper deck. And the applicants asked with this variance request for approval to reconstruct a non-conforming accessory structure of the upper deck. The plan includes essentially slightly adjusting it with that 4 by 4 foot notch being essentially made into deck space where the stairs came down, and there will not be a stairway from the upper deck down to the lower deck or patio area. And I would note that currently downspouts direct roof runoff from the river towards the river. The applicant is willing to redirect this runoff towards an infiltration area first, and so that is an aspect of the work.
I just ask you, I was waiting for a chance to jump in and ask you,
Sure.
where would the infiltration area be?
Yeah, let me bounce back to
Page 10, or no, I guess a different page would be page 8, maybe, would be one on which you could show us.
yeah.
Back about, yeah, there. That one might work.
Yes. And Sarah, I'm going to ask for a little help here. Maybe you can jog my memory on the infiltration area.
Yep, so just to the left, if you will, of your cursor right there where that small boulder wall is, there was a downspout right there. Kind of, it would be the southwest corner of the house, if you will.
Southwest, so down.
Down just a little bit further, right there, a little bit further. So right there is where there was a downspout that was directing, and there was some tubing shedding water away from the roof
Just
line.
kind of daylighted out with one of those plastic tubes
Yes.
from the end of the downspout.
Yep, and so when we were on site just this last time with the contractor, we had just talked about a little retention area right there to allow it to infiltrate right there rather than shooting it out further, directing it towards the river.
So whenever the river is not flooding that area, water from the roof would be able to infiltrate there.
Yeah, I think the
Yes.
idea is to do something to diffuse it and allow it to infiltrate rather than just run more directly to the river and potentially carry some of the silt sediment with it.
Thanks.
Sure. And I think that's really the gist of this conditional use and 2 variances because the work is beyond the ordinary maintenance on the upper and lower decks.
Look like much controversy here, but board members, do you have any questions you want to ask?
I know these people just bought this house, but do you know, has this house been flooded?
Okay, if you've already signed in, then step up to our microphone.
Sure, so if you go back to 1952, this house would have flooded 4 times.
Are you Mr. Lee?
I am. Yeah, sure, I'm Tom Lee, the owner of the property.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
But it hasn't been flooded since then.
Well, 4 times.
4 times, so I believe the last time
Oh, I
was
see.
in the
I
late
got you.
late
I know what
90s,
you
early
mean.
2000 period. So I'm aware that flooding is possible. I'm not naive to that point, but
Any other questions, board members? Is there anything you wish to say, Mr. Lee, that hasn't already been said?
No, first of all, I appreciate the presentation, the work that staff has done. I own another property, non-conforming at 186 Cove Road. We remodeled that, worked hand in hand with the department here. I'm aware of the obligation. We brought in this team before we even started the process. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the closing of government, we found ourselves stuck in a situation where we couldn't, we were uncertain and working in a gray area. But I want to emphasize that I am absolutely aware of the concerns that you try to manage, and we're not trying to skirt the spirit of the law. We are definitely trying to adhere in every way to what I believe is the intent.
All right, does anybody else want to be heard in favor of this application? Anybody here who opposes it? Anybody who wants to oppose it, or anybody who wants to make any point at all, not necessarily for or against, but something that hasn't been covered that would help the board to make a better decision? Board members, do you have any more questions? Anything you want to direct to the zoning staff at this point to get anything more into the record before we would close the hearing? Joe, I'm disappointed. Can't you come up with something?
I probably could, but I'm not gonna.
All right.
Yeah, I have a question. Talk about the lower deck being a patio, but is it a terminology or something? I mean, patio is usually blocks.
Yeah, here they're planning to use pavers
Yeah.
instead of the wood that previously existed.
I
No,
just,
there's nothing in the
That's-
ordinance. That's not a technical term.
Mr. Chair, I just clarify too, we did talk about, because under a patio, generally you're wanting a base material to set that on. They're not really intending to bring in more fill. They're kind of redistributing what's there to get the base set for the patio pavers. Personally, I think that's probably a better way to go than reestablishing wood. Although there's composite materials available today for decking, that patio, if high water conditions do come up there, that will hold up much better. And I think, so as far as what it does for the property and longevity, it's probably a good solution in my mind.
This strikes me as being net beneficial from a Riverway standpoint. those wooden retaining walls all have a life, and it's shorter than rock retaining walls, assuming things are put in properly. So that should be good, and there's, by the removal of the stairway, that readily compensates for the slight, almost de minimis increase in the upper deck. As far as I can see, I asked about the boulders in front of the lower deck, but then the answer, of course, was properly given, that there had to be a piece of wood there, and so the boulders essentially replaced the piece of wood. And the lower fascia of the house is a rock type of thing, so it's going to be rocks in front of rocks, so that doesn't create any visual disadvantage. Probably an improvement again, and certainly there'll be a net gain if the roof runoff is allowed to infiltrate and or at least become sheet flow rather than concentrated flow, which generally leads to erosion cutting and that kind of thing. One of the reasons that we regulate reconstruction of the frameworks of decks is because it gives us an opportunity to look at the management of stormwater off the roofs and off the driveways and stuff like that, and make sure they're all up to modern best management practices, BMPs, for surface water management. It is so important these days. As the flooding gets higher and higher and more frequent, it seems, any pollutants, using the term broadly, that are deposited on the land tend to get washed into the river, and if they can be soaked in instead, that's a better thing. And we don't want to wash more soil into the river if we can avoid it. So overall, I'm favorably impressed with the project. I think it's a good thing that the staff caught it in time, or whatever happened there. We don't need to get into it, but it's being worked on. So, from the tenor of the questions, and the absence of questions, I would gather that my fellow board members are not proposing any modifications to the staff recommendation, that you found it persuasive, including the reasons and the establishment of the hardship, the way it was stated, and all that is apparently satisfactory. If anybody is in fact proposing a modification, as soon as I close the hearing, then you can bring it up, of course. Anything more before closing the hearing and stopping the taking of testimony? Nothing. Okay, it's 12:38 according to the same clock that we're using for our official time, and I declare the hearing closed. That means we'll move into the decision phase here, culminating in a motion to approve or disapprove, along with reasons, and so on like that. So what are your wishes, board members?
Do you want a motion to approve all three at once, or do you want to do them individually?
Yeah, there's a question.
I think the way it was structured, it might be helpful if they're done individually.
All right, so then that, thanks for the question. The first would be the retaining wall renovation then. I'll make the motion to approve the retaining wall renovation along the driveway as proposed and for the reasons given.
I'll second it.
Mr. Miller seconds it. Is there discussion, members? No discussion. All in favor, vote aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passed unanimously. The next is a variance for the patio installation adjacent to the house. That's the lower level deck that's being replaced by pavers. Is there a motion on that?
I'll move that.
Mr. Peterson?
I'll second it.
Mr. Nickum? Discussion, members? All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Unanimously approved. And lastly, to remove the steps and reconstruct the upper deck.
I'll make a motion to approve the reconstruction, or remove the steps and replace the upper deck as presented.
Okay, to grant that variance, just as it is. That was Mr. Miller. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Nickam? Discussion?
I have a comment about, the comment's been made about Mr. Lee maybe adding vegetation. I like that. You know, I don't like to see these houses from the river. You go down the river, if you want to look at houses, you can get in your car and drive around. You get on the river, you like to see Mother Nature. So I liked his idea that he might be adding vegetation.
Thank you, Mr. Nickam. I had that, for some reason, maybe our minds were transmitting. As I was eating lunch at home today, I was having that same thought. I was thinking over again, why is it that this so-called national park gives a preference to the view from the river? And I think I mentioned it yesterday in connection with a case yesterday that we had, that it's the way the public gets to look at the riverside, at the river banks. That's the thing that the Lower St. Croix Riverway was established for. And so while landowners and homeowners always feel their house is a thing of beauty, or generally do, and would like to show it off, the thinking behind the rules is that the view from the river should be as natural as it was back when the park was established in 1972 and the first ordinances in 76. So it seems kind of counterintuitive many times, but that's what it's about. And I remember at least one study when I was with the Boundary Area Commission in which people were taken out on the river and asked to rate the view in terms of their subjective preference. And they were shown, they simply traversed the river on a boat, and at each home they were asked to rate the view. And it was found time and again, overwhelmingly, that if the house was visible, they gave it a lower rating than if it was essentially hidden. And as between located right at the water level, or located at mid-level, or located right on the, what do you call that, the skyline, if the house was at the skyline, they gave it the lowest possible rating. If it was at the water, they gave it the second lowest, and if it was in the middle, they preferred it. Does that make sense to you? In other words, universally, these people prefer not to see houses or their silhouettes. Yeah. So that's the setting in which we make our decisions. Okay. If we weren't doing so well according to the clock, I wouldn't wax so eloquent. Well, I'm sure it's not eloquent at all.
I think you make a good point in that the people often that live in the house want to see the river. And there's a little paradox in that, I don't know if it's a paradox or not, but it's frustrating on both sides, I guess, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, there's that. But then, of course, after Lake Minnetonka established a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit, and the big fast cigar boats or cigarette boats came to the St. Croix, many homeowners would prefer not to see those boats going up and down and hear their great throaty roar and then hear the waves crashing against their shore. Mixed bag. I think we're ready for a vote on our motion, aren't we? Yeah. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. That's unanimously approved. Okay. Good. Well, just run off a copy and I'll sign it. Now, let's see, we need to have a closed session with Mr. Cox, the Corporation Counsel, don't we? So as soon as folks are ready, you can leave the room and the board will meet with our lawyer.